At Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, we bring clarity to how policy shapes real lives across Oklahoma. And this is Unintended Consequences. This podcast is about what happens after decisions are made. Not what is intended, but what actually happens in people's lives and communities. In a state with one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, those outcomes matter. We'll be talking with people who have lived experiences and with leaders and organizations working on the ground in the communities across Oklahoma. Each episode, we'll take a closer look at the patterns, what the data shows, and what it means, and how it connects to stability. Because when we understand the full impact of our decisions, we have an opportunity to build something stronger. Hi, I'm Mike Shelton, and I want to welcome you today to the podcast Unintended Consequences, hosted by Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. We will be dissecting many issues that are affecting our high incarceration rates in Oklahoma. We will be talking to experts, we will be talking to thought leaders, we will be talking to people that are offering the services on the ground. Today, we have an amazing guest today. His name is Jed Chappell, and he is the executive director and founder of City Center here in Oklahoma City. It is so important that everybody understands that we don't stand alone as Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. We have to have partners on the ground throughout this state that we work with personally. So I'm so excited today to introduce all of Oklahoma and all those that will be joining us on this podcast to Jed Chappell, founder of City Center.
Yes, sir. So nice to meet you. It's so nice to be here, Mike. It's been great to meet you and just learn so much about what you're doing right now. So thank you for having me on.
Let me tell you, Jed, I am so excited to have you on this show.
Thank you.
I know your story. I've heard your story, and I think that everybody needs to understand why your story is not unusual, but you have taken a tough situation and you've made the most of it. Not only did you take that situation, but you are changing lives, not only here in Oklahoma City, but across the state of Oklahoma. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do.
No, thank you.
I thank you for being a partner with Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I appreciate you more than anything, being the boots on the ground to make sure those people that need help have that availability.
Thank you for saying that.
Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. It's a joy.
Now, I wouldn't do your background justice. I wouldn't do it justice, but we're going to kind of walk into it and just kind of talk about City Center. But let's start. Who is Jed Chappell?
Man, that's a big question. Jed is, I'm a person that is just extremely, I love my wife, my children, my family. I'm so grateful that I get to have that, have a family and love them and lead my family. It's a blessing. But, Jed I'm also a person that's very passionate about seeing change in areas that are obviously, we see things in our society today. We're like, oh, that clearly needs to change, and it seems like sometimes we're the only ones that see it sometimes, and I know that's not the case, but it can feel like that. So I love seeing things that are clearly, there's a need for some alteration there. I love seeing change happens. I'm a person that loves seeing young people empowered and not only empowered, but provided productive pathways to restorative things in life that can help them. I really love seeing that because a dignifying safe space does a lot for a young person, we've noticed. And so, but, as far as me, I grew up in Oklahoma City. I grew up here in the city. This is my city. I always say that I love Oklahoma City. I moved away for about a year and a half, and I just couldn't shake it. I was seeing all the issues still stacking up in Oklahoma and wondering, if I still had a part to play in that when I was away. And finally, I felt like, kind of God spoke to my heart a little bit, and said, it's time to go back home and start something that can help be a solution to the problem. And so I love Oklahoma City. It's where I want to see it grow and become better and its citizens become better. So that's really the kind of the foundation of me. But then, growing up in Oklahoma City, I had both parents in my house. My dad was a hard worker. My mom was an amazing woman, prayerful woman, grew up in church, specifically the Church of Christ, grew up in the Church of Christ, and knew God was real, knew he existed. I'm not sure I really experienced a relationship until a little bit later in life with God, in my opinion, and from my personal expression of what that looks like. Um, but by the time I was 11, my father passed, and he was a strong, person in our home that kind of kept our family safe, and my brothers were kind of doing some crazy stuff, drugs, alcohol, things like that. A lot of violence I saw growing up, things of that nature. And so when he passed, it felt like we were kind of left vulnerable in some different ways, And so um, my mom ended up getting remarried, and things didn't like the stepdad. That kind of is a common situation that can happen. But ended up getting into a lot of trouble eventually, selling drugs from 14 to 18. And so one day, some friends came over and said, "Hey, at this time of year in that 1995, at that time, it was during a drought season, and in the drug world, that means there's, for whatever reason, maybe some shortfalls in supply when it comes to product." And so, knowing that, I was a very unwise 18-year-old. So as fast as I made money, I spent it, and my friends knew that. So they knew I also had a gun. So they asked me if I wanted to come with them to commit some armed robberies. And I was like, sure. I was a young person that was very, at that time, confused, angry, no direction. The mentors I had in my life were guys that were showing me how to weigh drugs out and distribute them in a way that would earn a profit for both me and them. So I always tell people there's mentors out there on both sides. There's mentors that will grab a hold of our young people if we don't do it first, that are not going to lead them in the right direction. So anyway, I remember, they came over and they were going to commit these armed robberies, and we ended up going from house to house that day, throughout the week after they came to the house and invited me to come along with them that day. And so at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we said we're going to hit one last house, and I knew something was off. I just knew something in my gut, in my heart was off, but I did not want to look weak in front of my friends. So we went in the house. We're gathering things together, and we look out the window, and there's a police cruiser behind the girl driving the getaway car for us, which is pretty comical to call it a getaway car because it was a brown 80s model Buick with like 3 or 4 cylinders firing. So I'm not sure where we were getting away to, but
That sounds like my car.
there you go.
That's
Yeah.
the sound. That's the kind of car I was driving at that time too.
And it does illustrate the comical nature of like what we were even thinking, it's not comical, obviously, but you know what I mean? It was crazy. So look out the window, and the girl is getting pulled out of the getaway car. We leave the scene, start running through this neighborhood, and I'm confronted by an undercover police officer, draws his weapon on me. I draw my weapon on him. Before I can shoot, he shoots me 4 times in the chest, arm, and in the hand. And I lost about 65% of my blood, they say, I think was what I remember, and flatlined in the ambulance for, several seconds, and woke up handcuffed to a bed at Baptist Medical Center. And that was the beginning of a process for me. I realized that in that moment that things had to change. Obviously, I wish I could say I got it all together at that point, but it took a little while. But I look at that situation. That was the catalyst for Jed, and that's kind of why I shared that story, because I'm not ashamed of that. I am ashamed of the fact that I hurt people. I don't like that at all. Even though nobody was physically harmed, people were still emotionally harmed out of that whole situation. Their property was stolen. All kinds of stuff was bad. But, I'm thankful that I walked through that whole experience, then going to prison and everything else, because I learned so much about myself and so much about what I could actually do now with this experience. So, and there's a lot more to the story, but that's the thumbnail sketch.
Let me tell you, and it just takes me to a place I don't even know what question to ask you, because there's so many
Yeah.
pieces of there. I
Sure.
heard how important it is to have friends, the right kind of friends. I've heard that you were accountable for the situation that you
Yes.
had, the decisions that you made.
Mhm.
But let me take it down this. You told us that you went to prison.
Yes.
This podcast will be talking about people's lived experiences.
Yeah,
So let's just kind of talk
sure.
about that experience and the experience that you had and the individuals you met
Sure.
within there, and maybe
Yeah.
even how important family was to you during
Oh,
that
yeah.
process.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure. My prison experience was interesting. Anybody with it, and it sounds like we're going to have a lot of people listening that will be able to understand some of the things we're talking about. But I'll never forget. I remember um, pulling chain from A&R. Everybody know. I'm sure we know what A&R is, but it's assessment and receiving, and that's kind of where all your tests and lab work and all that kind of stuff is done to get you situated to move you on, categorize you. And I remember the green lizard picked me up. I'm 18 years old and I'm just like, what's going on? I'm in this jumpsuit and it's the middle of the night, probably 2 in the morning, and I get taken to James Crabtree in Helena. And it's an open dorm, medium to high security, I think at that time. I can't remember, but it was an old prison open dorm. And I remember thinking, man, this is different and crazy, laying on that bunk that first night at 18 years old, thinking, okay, what did I do?
Right.
Because I was sentenced to 47 years in prison eventually. Didn't share that part yet, but that's a whole story in and of itself. But that experience, so I go to prison, and I remember there at James Crabtree, there weren't a lot of opportunities necessarily at that time. I have no idea what it's like today, and I should, but I don't right now. But at that time, there weren't a ton of opportunities for you to really, you know, rehabilitate, at that time. And so eventually there was actually a private prison that opened up called Holdenville. And it was Davis Correctional Facility at the time. And they had a program there called Pride Therapeutic Community. So I thought, hey, there's something I can jump into. And it was kind of a test pilot, I think, at that time. And I went through that and graduated the program, and it was super beneficial. I'll tell you what I learned the most in that program. Honestly, there was a thing called the relating chair, and the goal is obviously, I know now, was to help us learn how to communicate with each other from different backgrounds, and like let's apply that to prison. That's a unique situation that honestly I am so grateful for, because I met so many fascinating people from all different backgrounds, all different stories, all different paths to getting in the same room that we were in together. Some innocent that I legitimately believe, some not, some repentant, some not, some
Right.
people that were, but that just, I learned so much in that process. And I'm so grateful for that, because I gained a new understanding of people, I think, and I think that might be what we're lacking a little bit today, is a little bit of understanding about each other at times. And so, but that was a very beneficial thing. And then moving on through the process, I had to be hyper aggressive on my pursuit of rehabilitation. And thankfully, at the private prison I was at Davis, at that time, there was a ton of programming. And so I took advantage of a lot of that, everything, honestly, everything you could take there at the time, everything from Toastmasters to life skills to you name it, and even eventually college courses. So there was that tremendous benefit that I did experience there, especially when it came to college, because I think it was, if you were under a certain age, somewhere in the 20s range, you could be eligible for a grant for college there while you're in prison. And so that was extremely helpful for me, because I saw some light, I saw some light that, oh, I can actually make progress even in here that could help me for my future. So I thought, man, that's cool. I'm actually gaining tools, And honestly, I wasn't thinking like that when I was there. I was just trying to do whatever I could. But I look back now, and I realized on my own, without really realizing it, I was accessing what I needed to gain the tools I needed to be successful when I got out.
Right.
And so the experience in prison was, it's so funny. I say I never want to go back, obviously, but I met some of my closest friends in there. Some of my closest, um, you know,
That's powerful.
some of my closest friends, and they're actually really successful businessmen now on this side of everything.
A lot of smart people there.
A lot of smart people, very intelligent. Matter of fact, one of my cellmates, I love this guy. He was one of my closest friends for years. And we always call him MacGyver, because he was so smart. I mean, he could engineer things out of some of the most obscure items that you find, that you can gather whatever you can in prison, And I thought, man, what if we could figure out what it was that makes us all make the choice to go a different direction, which is typically a life experience, trauma, all these things. What if we could learn to make that a priority to manage that and help that? Because, man, can you imagine what kind of society we had if we help people just adjust their mindset and help them maybe get the therapy necessary it would take to get their mind moving in the right direction? Yeah, there's a lot of things that could happen in that. And so, um, yeah, I'm thankful for my experience in prison. I always think every system can use a little bit of tweaking. It can use some help. And I would say that when my time in, I could definitely see there's some change that needed to happen for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you went from having an inmate number.
Yep. 240-743. You can't find it now though, because I've been expunged, but yeah.
Well, and let me just tell you, one thing I know
Yeah.
is that everybody that's been through that system
Yeah.
knows that number.
Knows that number. Count time.
Yes.
Yep. I know. Yep.
And but you got 47 years and you're a young man.
I still feel young. So, I still feel young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but you've gone from that inmate number.
Yeah.
Now you are executive director for City Center. Sure. And at some point something triggered. Was it in prison that triggered the thought of creating a space called City Center?
Yeah. I don't know if there was ever the idea that came through. Honestly, I didn't know that. I wasn't sure if I could ever, I don't know if I was even thinking about it. I wasn't sure if I could ever do anything, significantly for whatever, and what's significant. You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes walking somebody across the street is more significant than leading a movement, that could do more help sometimes. But I never really thought about that in prison. But when I got out of prison, I did want to be a part of church and some ministry or some kind of form of help of some kind. I wanted to help people. And, things kind of evolved and I was attending a church and I remember I'd been out of prison for 2 weeks and this youth pastor comes up to me after service and in the lobby and says, "Hey, man, I think you'd be a great youth pastor, or youth volunteer. You want to come serve across the street at our youth building?" I was like, "Man, you better run a background check first before we decide on that,
Right.
And so anyway, there was these opportunities that were coming my direction. And so I just would walk through the door and he let me volunteer and things progressed there. And the next relationship led to them saying, "What if you're a pastor on staff?" And so it's just amazing how things can happen and one thing can lead to another through relationships. And, the next thing you know, you're on this track of jumping into something. And so as I started doing that ministry in the church, I was the outreach pastor. And so I would go into communities all over Oklahoma City. And, it was such a really, really cool thing we got to do because one thing I told the pastor of the church that I was at, I was like, "Man, I really want to go into places where there's, no financial ROI,
Right.
There's just a spiritual one, like we want to go into places where we're not looking for that. We're not looking to get people that are going to come and help us grow our church necessarily. We want people to come to the places that we go to, obviously, but more than that, we just want to serve, And he was on board with it. And that was really cool. And so I had the privilege of being able to build an outreach ministry at that church that was really amazing to watch grow. And we were reaching a lot of, Section 8 government subsidized housing communities like Cedar Haven, Ambassador Courts, Oak Grove, all over the city, And I was like, we're going to the ones that I know we need to go to, because I know the ones we need to go to.
Right.
And so that began this idea of like, there was always a little bit of a restraint at times when it came to what we could do through the church, And so I thought, what if we had our own space someday? And so that seed began to grow in my heart when I was a pastor on staff at that church. And then funny, one day, a good friend of mine who used to be on staff at that church, we were driving downtown and we drove by a building downtown. I think it's actually the Frontline Church building down there, but he said, "Man, you should find yourself a building like that someday and start a center." Okay. And that seed years and years and years ago, that was a seed that planted that idea. Mm. And so after going back and forth from LA to Oklahoma City on trips to the Dream Center and things like that, there was a lot that resonated from that space too. So that's kind of where it was born. And so, but I thought, you know, why is it that we keep creating centers or places that are needed in these spaces that we live in? And I thought, I think it's probably because it's how we're delivering services. Maybe we have great curriculum. I mean, I know some of the most brilliant people. I mean, Gerald Scott, he has written some great curriculum.
Know
And
it, Gerald
his
well.
people that he has over there. I mean, these guys are incredibly intelligent. We have great curriculum that's evidence based. That's not the problem. I think it's how we deliver services. I think it's how people feel after they experience whatever we're offering. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I've seen it on the other side of that, and it's just, you know, how someone feels, if they feel dignified or respected or cared for, that's different than if it's like, here's your food, that's a
Right.
different conversation. And so one of the things that I'm committed to is just, I really want to see our staff remain healthy emotionally, physically, mentally, so that when that opportunity for fatigue there can come in, when it comes to being compassionate and serving and things like that, that they're strengthened in that area. So, we have to consider the whole person when it comes to, the people that are serving our community in different ways, and also the people that we're serving, you know, that component right there can derail anybody very quickly,
Right.
and so we just have to have compassion for that and figure out ways to apply what we do know that does work with compassion, care, dignity, respect, in my opinion.
And OCJR is working to modernize our justice system.
Hmm.
And you work with a lot of people that are
Yeah.
either are justice involved,
Yeah.
on the edge of being justice involved, or you
Yeah.
see the light happening that they're going to be soon,
Yeah.
and it could
A lot
happen
of
any
it.
day. But you decided to serve this population
Mm.
because your own life stories. Uh, t- let's talk about the city center.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those people that you serve
Sure.
every day, those
Yeah.
needs that they
Yeah.
need.
Oh man, we have so many great folks that come to the center. I have to think about Larry, who he comes by every day to get coffee, and he's just so much fun. And he lives outside in the community, and he comes and gets clothes every day, and but he's family, and we have Maria, who her and her family have been coming to the center to help for a long time in regard to, and they in the beginning they were receiving the help, but now Maria refuses to let us pay her, and she deep cleans the building every Monday with her friends and her family. And so it's a family there, and then we have our youth that come in all shapes and sizes. They're all trying to figure out their own way. And about young people, it's funny because I look at young people today, and especially our young men, they kind of are looking around like they don't know what's going on, but they don't want anybody to know they
Oh,
don't know what's going on,
absolutely. Absolutely.
So what's really cool about a safe, dignifying space is that the guard gets let down pretty quickly there. So our young people there are facing challenges for sure. We have a young person there that, he's been with us since he was 8, and he's made a ton of progress, and he's in ministry school now, and he actually hosted our podcast at the mayor's office, at Mayor Holt's office, and
Really?
interviewed him, and did unbelievable.
Right.
And this kid is just amazing, just unreal. So I just really think that, our center is very much so like a home, and by design, our goal is to have um, smaller micro centers like that in neighborhoods, because we feel
Absolutely.
like they need to be accessible. They need to be relational. They need to be led by indigenous leadership within each community.
So
Um,
important.
but they had to have this culture and heart too that is very dignity focused and very respect focused. And so that's kind of our hope. So
Well, and let me just tell you, you've said again so many things that are so important to this whole movement, this
yeah,
modernization of our justice system. You talked about Maria.
yeah,
The fact of it is people, specifically people that are poor or low
yeah,
income, they are just they are one ticket away.
Oh man,
They
yeah,
are one ticket away from being put in jail or something like that because they can't afford to
yeah,
pay for their ticket. They can't. A lot of them can't pay for the renewal of their driver's license
right.
and find themselves in deeper trouble. The justice
That
system,
much money, yeah,
just that much money,
yeah,
it preys on poor people and
yeah,
people like with the heart of Maria.
yeah.
She does not want it for free. She wants the
Not at
opportunity.
all.
And
Yeah,
so many people just need the opportunity.
yeah.
Just like the young man you talked about that did the podcast in the mayor's office, you
Mm,
put people in a unique situation for them to shine,
mm.
and they will show up if
They
you give
will.
them the tools.
They will.
And so I commend everything
Yeah.
that you're
Oh,
doing.
thank you.
But City Center is right here in the Oklahoma City metro
Yeah,
area.
sure
How
is.
many years ago did you start it?
Yep.
Not only did how many years did you ago did you start it, but where was it and where are you now as far
Sure.
as location? How do people find you?
Yeah. So we're in War Acres. We're at 42nd North MacArthur. So we're just right over there off MacArthur and near 39th Express, 39th there, old Route 66. And so we've been there for almost 10 years now, but we initiated paperwork in November of 2016 and opened our doors for the first time February 2017. So it's been an amazing ride. When we opened the doors, we probably had 300 volunteers that helped us over a 12-week period renovate the entire space. And about 1% of those volunteers were actually skilled. So, so
Right.
that's always a fun, and, it was super fun. Our family, my kids, we all painted those walls. We renovated everything ourselves together with all these volunteers, and it was a ton of fun. And one of the things we did is I went to every single community leader in the area. And,
So
I just
important.
asked them, what are the relevant needs? Because we all have these great ideas at times, but the truth is we need to make sure that we are relevant, um, and so the relevant needs in that community at the time were, there was food insecurity happening and still is, and there, lack of clothing and need to help curb some costs for bills and stuff like that with things like that offered, but then also mentorship for young people. And so we hit the ground running with those two things. And we always say that's kind of our Chick-fil-A sandwich. We stick to that. But because we stick to that, because, we truly believe that we operate within a collective impact model. So if there's somebody, if there's a need in the community, if there's a program that we say, man, I think our kids would really benefit from this thing, before we create that new program internally, we say, who are our nonprofit partners that are doing great things already, that are like-minded, that could jump on board with this? And so we include them, get them on board, and they use our space for free to execute their programming. And it benefits our kids and it benefits their program because they have a space to do it with no overhead.
Right.
And so I just think, hey guys, this is a team sport. We can all win together. So I love that kind of just networking and connecting and locking arms. And, there's potential. We got to hash some stuff out with all that, you know what I mean? Because, every leader has their own way of doing things. But the good news is we believe that we, have an approach that really invites people to really realize, hey, this is about the community. It's not necessarily about one leader's style or anything else. And so that's been really exciting to watch that collective impact model at work. So,
Working with young people and families right now, what
yeah.
patterns do you see
Yeah.
of those that are coming through your door?
Yeah, especially with young people, I'll start there. I think with young people, what we see is we make so much progress. We see so much progress with them. And the one thing that always pulls them back is family, unfortunately, that's not willing to progress. And so what's really that's been a pattern that we've seen with some of our kids. And so we're trying to figure out, because obviously, we would never want to get in the way of family, but at the same time, we also hope that our young people can see a new way of thinking that's more productive, for them. Because I know what that's like, I mean, it's easy to, it's family, man. I'm not gonna forget my family,
Right.
especially when that's all you got, it feels like at times. So we see that pattern. We did see a big uptick when the SNAP crisis stuff happened, but thankfully we had a ton of great partners that helped us ride that wave. But yeah, we do see. You can almost tell what's happening in the community or in government or whatever, because you'll see fluctuations in food when those certain things happen, food needs. So we see a lot of patterns of up and down with that fluctuation of needs. And it's not just around the 1st and the 15th, it's around other things, you know?
Right.
So, so yeah, then we do see a lot of families in our community. We see a lot of Hispanic families that just amazing families that have been coming for a lot of years, but we are very much so diverse too in our, the people that come to the center. Northwest OKC, that's kind of where I grew up, and I've always loved that about Northwest OKC is that it's so diverse, that there's so many different cultures and stuff like that that are here. But so we see that at our center too. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, let me just tell you the work that you're doing, the services. If somebody walked through the door of
Yeah.
City Center, what kind of services would they be able to find?
Yeah. So you can come in and first of all, you can receive a meal if you'd like. If somebody's in need of a meal, we do warm meals every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. for that we can give to go box meals for the community. You can also see when you come in, if you have a need for any clothing, we have gently used clothing in our clothing room. And, each individual each day can take up to 4 bags of clothing. And so that's been a valuable resource. We have so many clothes that come in to our center. Then we have our food pantry and we serve, it's open Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, which is not, I don't think that's the typical pattern for food pantries. I think a lot of times they're either open once a week or once a month, but we felt like the need was so great there. We wanted to have it open every day or at least 5 days a week. And so you can go in there and receive food for your family, for each family member, 3 meals for up to 3 to 5 days. And so we also make sure that people are provided a whole meal. My wife has an incredible story of being a single mom when she grew up in that actual community. She was living in that community as a single mom, putting herself through college and really, trying to make things happen. And she had to go, this was years ago, but she had to go seek help at a local pantry, and it was a church. But they kind of made her run through the gamut of, where do you live? What's your, let me see your bank statements. Let me see all this information. And it was just felt like she already felt pretty small when she came in there, I think. And then I think after that experience, she just felt worse. And then when she got the box, I think there wasn't enough of the ingredients to combine for a meal, So, and it had great intentions. I'm not dogging that. I don't even know what the church was, but I do know that because of her experience there, when you come to City Center, what else you can see is that you're not going to be asked for an ID, where you're from, any of that stuff. You can sign in is all we ask you to do. I don't even, we just ask you to sign in so we can make record that you receive services, but we don't want to run anybody through that gamut. We don't want to create any barrier to services. Somebody's hungry, we're going to get them food, So that's one of our positions too. We really try to monitor that. And, we do feel like our data points are more narrative based.
Right.
I feel like that's a data point that we overlook sometimes. What does the narrative look like of this person's time coming to our center? And so we try to measure things like that, I think, ultimately.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a couple other questions. Is that, of course, our podcast is
Yeah.
Unintended Consequences. I don't know if you know, but I sat in the Oklahoma House of Representatives
Oh,
for
wow.
about 12 years. And that statement, unintended consequences, boy, it never failed. It almost is talked about
Oh,
on a
man.
daily basis.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can imagine.
we pass laws in the name of safety and security.
Yep.
Do you see any unintended consequences? And I'm not asking you to be political. What
Sure,
I'm
yeah,
asking you
yeah.
to be that things that we, in the name of one thing, we're getting another, and we've brought on our own unintended consequences by not using those data points,
Yeah.
by not using real life
Sure.
experiences, those things that it sounds good for a headline, but when it touches real life, it's ruining not only families but communities.
Yeah, I think speaking about unintended consequences, I don't know why this story pops into my head, but I had filed for a pardon, and well, I actually didn't file for it. Somebody filed it for me, actually, a paralegal, and something was wrong with the filing. So it got kicked back and I received it. It was years ago. And so I didn't think anything of it. But in 2014, I got a letter from the Pardon and Parole Board saying, hey, you have a hearing coming up this next Tuesday. I was like, what? I'm like, I shouldn't have a hearing. So I go, and my time slot was from 3 to 5 in the afternoon. And you probably know this, but what I think it's like anytime after 11 a.m., your percentages go way down of being approved. Yeah.
Right.
So I was thinking, okay, that's interesting. And then I go dead last. I mean, it was probably 4:59 when I walked up. And Jerry Askins, I think, was there, and then the board and a security guard. It's just us. And they leaned forward or leaned back, and the lady that was leading the chair, she said, Mr. Chappell, just tell us what do you have to say? And so I didn't know what to say, so I just tell them my whole story. And I was a pastor at this time, and I was getting ready to actually move away, but after being on staff at the church I was at for a while, but I'd done some really cool things in the community. So I thought, I don't know, I wasn't even expecting anything. And then in the middle of it, most of them start to cry, when I'm telling the story. And when I'm done, the lady leans back and she leans forward now, and she says, Mr. Chappell, she said, I don't know if you realize this, but your situation popped up, and that's a pretty serious deal that happened for you. And we reviewed your jacket, we reviewed your information, all this stuff. And, we agreed this morning that the answer was going to be no. She said, but after hearing that and seeing you in front of us, I think for me, it's a yes. And they all unanimously voted yes in that moment. So my point in telling that story is this: if they would have just judged me on that, which was all really incredible stuff that, I feel like I'd been able to be a part of. Unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. But even that, if they would have just judged me on that, they wouldn't have given me a pardon. Mm. But when you're human to human in front of somebody, it's hard to deny who they are, if they're being honest, and you can tell. And so the unintended consequence could have been not giving me that opportunity.
Right. And
so I think I hope I'm answering your question. To that point, I think, what if we created processes that are efficient and effective, that are more human, that are more like, how can I get down to the humanity of this person before I can get down to the thing that I hate that they did?
Right.
No,
absolutely.
I think it could be a game changer.
You answered it amazingly.
Okay.
And so you hit it right on the head. Now, let me tell you that I told everybody that you were outstanding gentlemen, and you have the title of dad, you have the title of mentor and pastor and executive director. You have a bunch of titles. Yeah. But you have a title called, you're an author as well.
I am.
Full Circle Guide.
Yeah.
And let me just ask you to talk about the book that you wrote.
Yeah, I will. Writing a book is interesting. I'm sure you've written. I haven't had a chance to read your book.
No, I haven't written a book.
You haven't written a book? Okay. I was going to say, you seem like you probably should.
No, yeah, well, I don't know if anybody wants to read my book.
I don't know about that. But anyway, sometimes you just got to write. And so I felt like I was supposed to write my story down in full. And so that's what that is. It just kind of talks about my journey in life and some of the things that I was thinking about and processing. And even now, as I read that today, I'm thinking, man, there's so much more to the story that should be updated. But so it's really my life, what it looked like, kind of the things I've processed through, and I feel like I might have been thinking when I was younger, and hoping that I can translate a message to people that, hey man, you are never too far gone. You're not. And so sometimes you have to believe that when nobody else does, and so especially in a system that may, and I have no idea where the system is at today, but especially in a system that maybe doesn't do that for you, so you have to really be aggressive on pursuing that thing that you're wanting for your life. So my hope is that people will see that, like, I have a lot of advantages still. Even in my situation, I realized that I had a lot of advantages. I have a lot of friends in there still.
Right.
that deserve being out. I wish were home, with their family. But um, so yeah, I hope that there is a way to figure out who those next, you know, community shakers are, that can actually, because they've been a part of the problem.
Right.
Now they can be a part of the solution. It's like, you know, I would love to have a reformed um, alarm system tech, for all my properties, that if I had a lot of property,
Right.
because a person that used to be a burglar or something, because, they know exactly what it looks like, what people are thinking, what they're going to do, but they're on the good side of it now, and they're protecting people. So, if we really look at it, there's so much that we're missing, I think, in our society when we overlook people. And so that's what it can tend to feel like and look like, I think.
Absolutely. So Full Circle God, where can you pick it up?
It's on Amazon. And so you can pick it up there. And yeah, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing that. It means a lot to me. And there's a portion of the proceeds that go to City Center too. So it does help feed young people, help them, get mentored and things like that. So,
well, let me just tell you, we are in this fight together.
Yes.
The things, your life experiences, the people that you discussed today, their life experiences, that fight goes on and on. OCJR, Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, is so excited to have our 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, that's
this
awesome.
year we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary, and people talk about it all the time, especially people closest to Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. When we started this push 10 years ago, there was hardly no other organizations out there working for this population of Oklahomans, working for Oklahoma to be better.
That's great.
Today we have not only Oklahomans for Criminal Justice, we don't only have Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, we have a whole host of service providers like City Center that are doing the work on the ground that we are here to support and celebrate the work that you all are doing. Awesome. And I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
Okay, I got you.
If you were giving advice to your 18-year-old self that found themselves being shot 4 times, that made the decision to get in that car and go down that street, what advice would you give that person?
Man, that's a good question. I wrestle with that question sometimes, just because would I want them to do something different? I'm not sure. I think that guy got exactly what he needed at the time. So I think that I would just encourage him to keep his head up, because things are going to get better. If he keeps making the next right decision. I think that's what I'd tell him. Obviously the obvious answer is I would say, hey, don't go out robbing people or selling drugs. That's obvious, but I just think, if I could give him wisdom for what's to come, I would just tell him, embrace it when it starts to come, and you'll know that it was all not for nothing. I think that's what I'd say, because I'm not sure that, me changing that path would be the best path for me, for my life. I'm not sure it would. Right. I don't like that it happened. It sounds kind of crazy maybe to some people, but I learned a lot in that process. So,
well, we're asking our viewers to please click on that like and subscribe button for Unintended Consequences. We want you to look up the website for for Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, OCJR. We want you to like and subscribe to City Center. Why don't you tell them how to get connected with City Center?
Hey, go to our website, okcitycenter.com, or I'm sorry, .org. It's OK okcitycenter.org. Sometimes people say okccitycenter.org. It's actually okcitycenter.org. And you can go there and you can check out everything we have going on. But then we also are on social media on Instagram and Facebook, same handle. And we'd love for you guys to follow us, check us out, the things we have going on, and check out our podcast. We have a lot of guests coming on our podcast as well. And it's been a lot of fun to do that whole thing. And we look forward to having you hopefully on the show as well.
Lock me in. I'm ready.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, Apple, everywhere. It's Voices of OKC. So
Voices of OKC.
Yep.
Well, we are excited to have you again. My name's Mike Shelton. I'm with Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, and we are exploring unintended consequences.